Shalom, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday night. I'm glad to see that I'm not alone. It's actually nice to be here. Um, I've been talking last couple of weeks, or last week especially. I did a much better job, but we were talking about the book of Esdras. Now, Esdras is an apocryphal book. It's a apocryphal simply is a Catholic word for hidden. So we were looking at some hidden text, and it wasn't hidden because it was part of the Bible until the 1800s, and then it was taken out of the Bible. It's still in the Catholic Bible. It's still in the Coptics. It's in several Greek Orthodox, lots of different groups, but not in the King James or any of the New Testament Bibles that we have today. Now, the Apocrypha is actually 15 books, 14 books, and we're only talking about 2 chapters out of one of the books. Now, the book we're talking about is Second Esdras, and Esdras is actually a Greek word for the name Ezra. And so for those who are watching for the first time, just to give you a little bit of a background of what we're doing, this Esdras claimed to be the Esdras of Babylon and of Media Persia. And so he's going to give us a lineage, and we'll get to look at that in a minute. But I just wanted to give you some understanding of what's going on. Now, the original Ezra lived during the end of the exile, was one of the first Jews to return to Jerusalem and helped in the reestablishment of the city of Jerusalem and built the altar, set the first set of stones around where the temple would be. And then all of the people kind of spread out and they began to develop their own home sites. Later, they would come back. Nehemiah would come. Nehemiah was responsible for helping them get the wall up so that they could begin to work on what was going on the inside. And then they began with the temple after that. So there was lots of things going on. Now, the Ezra that we find here, I went back into the first chapter, and this is his way of introducing the book. He begins by saying the scroll, or the second scroll of the prophet Ezra, son of Zechariah, son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok, the son of Hatub, the son of Hajjah, the son of Hibias, the son of Eli, the son of Amariah, son of Uzziah, son of Memonoth, son of Arna, son of Uzziah, son of Borath, son of Abishu, the son of Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron from the tribe of Levi. Ezra was a captive in the region of the Medes during the rule of King Artaxerxes the Persian. Now, what you actually have here is the lineage of Ezra. Ezra in the book of Ezra. Ezra from that 6th century BC. But the records that we have for this book actually don't come until the first century, maybe the 2nd century after CE, after we begin to turn over. But as you're going through this, I want you to understand that much of the book of Esdras actually does have prophetic significance. There are places where it's a little iffy, but it's not something where you can't learn something from the text. But we're going to talk about this particular section because it deals with the United States and where we're at in this. Now, I spent last week giving you a history lesson, actually, that started probably with Woodrow Wilson and the beginning of what appears to be what I would call the beginnings of the swamp, the beginning of that secret state that was going on. And it would continue on, and it began to pick up with the character of Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover was very significant in the sense that he brought into the government what's called the Council on Foreign Relations, which brought in many financial people, bankers, people that had really no government responsibility and owed the government nothing, but were there to give advice, there to give their permission of what's going on. And so as we're going through our story, then I want you to understand that we're going to be looking again at history, only this time I want to go back and pick up Daniel again. And the reason I want to go back and pick up Daniel again is because when we begin to think about the Antichrist, which is a Christian term, we're going to look at specifically who this character is. And I'm going to give you some hints as to where we might find this character. So that's the focus of our study tonight. So let's go. I want to first begin by having you go to the second chapter of the book of Daniel. Now, I've got my King James written on here, so I'm going to use the King James that I have because of the fact I could use Art Scroll, but I'm going to use the King James version because I wrote it down. Now, we're going to do Daniel chapter 2. We're not doing the whole chapter. I only want to do a few verses from it because that's where the flavor of what I'm going to talk about and what Esdras is going to talk about. Daniel probably heard much of the prophecy that's going to regard the United States. But according to the Midrashic writings, Daniel was so confused by the 70 weeks and all of the 2,300 days and all of those other things that he really did not pay attention to this. And so that's why Ezra has been called upon to write this all down. So we're in chapter 2, and I want you to go to verse number 40. It begins by saying, "And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron." Now remember, this is the statue that we're looking at. The statue had a head of gold, which was Nebuchadnezzar. Then it had a chest of silver, which happened to be the Medo-Persian Empire. And then we had the copper, which was the Greek Empire. And then finally the iron, which is the Roman Empire. So as we go through this, it says, "For as much as the iron breaks into pieces and subdues all things, and as the iron that breaks all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou saw the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, and the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken." And it says in 43, again, and I want you to pay attention to this. This verse is where I really want to go. "And whereas thou saw iron mixed with miry clay," this is the phrase, "they shall mix them together with the seed of men." So this iron is going to mix with the seed of men. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? What I'm thinking at this point in time is we actually have something happening to this iron and clay mixture. This is where we're going to find, quote, the Antichrist, if you want to use that term. Gog and Magog, if you want to use that term. The final character, however you want to put it. This becomes the key that we're going to unlock when we go through Daniel 7. But I want you to find this first off. They shall mingle or mix themselves with the seed of men. So these are they. And the question then becomes, who are they? Okay. Now look what happens next. And it says, "In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." So this kingdom with the iron mixed with clay will last forever. It goes to the end of what we would call the end of days. Understand that this empire is going to last, and it will be part of the last empire that we're going to deal with. And so, "For as thou saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it breaks in pieces the iron and the brass, the clay and the silver and the gold, and the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass thereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure." So we know that this statue represents the kingdoms that are going to be significant in the Jewish understanding. It doesn't list China. China is not important. China is not part of what's going on. It doesn't list Egypt. Egypt has already had its day. It doesn't list Assyria. Assyria has already had its day. It lists these empires. And then when we talked before about Daniel chapter 7, I indicated that there was also a second hint in here that there was new empires that would also be found to have copper and clay and all of the rest of it. So we're looking at a statue. The statue has two legs. The legs are iron. By the time you reach the feet now have become both iron and clay, or miry clay, or potter's clay, or whatever word you want to use, but it's a mixture of elements, not as strong as iron by itself. It's a mixture that's there. When God finally brings an end to this empire, he will simply strike the feet, and the four empires above will crush themselves. They'll fall apart. But we need to understand they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. So again, what does it mean that they, who are they? What are they about? I believe we need to go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 6. So if you want to go back to Genesis chapter 6, and I want you to go down to about the 4th verse. You remember, this is the flood story that we're going to be looking at. Now, if you're looking at chapter 6 and you're looking at verse number 4, this is who I believe they are. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And also afterwards, when the sons of the rulers would consort with the daughters of man, who would bear to them, they were the mighty who from old were men of devastation. They then are the offspring of a marriage between a woman who were human and angels, the watcher angels that they were talked about in the book of Enoch, which is also, again, an apocryphal book, and the book of Jubilees. So these angels had come down, consorted with women, created creatures that were called Nephilim. Now remember, God is going to destroy the earth because it becomes Hamas. The word used in here is Hamas. Hamas means to be violent, chaotic. Those are the terms that are used, or robbers. So the world became totally chaotic at this point in time. As it becomes chaotic, God looks down and he says, I can't strive with man any longer. And so he plans with Noah to build an ark. The ark that he builds is the one that is going to save he and his family. Now, as the story goes on, we remember the fact that the 8 were on the boat. But again, when we get to the other side in the book of Exodus, chapter or Numbers, when we start looking at the spy story, the spies walk into the land and they say, oh my gosh, there are the giants. They're the Nephilim. They're the Anakim. They're all of these characters, names that they'd already heard. So they're walking into a land. Well, if God destroyed everybody on the other side, how on earth did the Nephilim make it across? Everything was supposedly destroyed. Well, there were lots of suppositions on this. Some of them simply said that the Nephilim simply found a way to hang on to wood and crossed over. Others say that Og, which is one of those Nephilim, found a way to hang on to the side of the boat, and somebody on the boat fed him through a hole. So he simply clung to the boat. They gave him food. He managed to make it to the other side. The reason they understand he made it to the other side is because in the book of Genesis, when the story happens that Lot is kidnapped and taken north, Abraham is given notice that his nephew had been taken. The man who gave him the notice was Og. So Og was on both sides of the flood. That's what we understand. Now, as we're going through this, then, these characters then are on both sides of the flood. So they didn't all die over there. So the question then becomes, after they enter into the land, the Jews enter into the land, and the Anakim and all of these others are there, what happens to them? Do they all disappear? Do they all die? Well, nothing's ever said. So we have to assume maybe they all died. But if you go back onto the internet, you can find several stories about giants in Java or some far eastern, southeastern island country or something. So there's still stories that they still exist. But as it is then, now we can go back to that phrase where it says they shall mingle or mix themselves with the seed of men. They would be the Nephilim. So we have a way of understanding that there's this character. Now, remember when we were studying in the pyramids, and if you remember, the Pyramid of Giza had two tunnels that went from inside either the king's chamber or the queen's chamber and focused through the wall. At that particular point, at the beginning of the season of spring, as you looked out through one portal, you could see the belt of Orion. If you looked out through the other portal, you could see the constellation we call Pleiades, the Seven Sisters. Well, those were the two main sources of gods for the Egyptians. From them, they drew the characters called Ra and all of the others. So they were very significant. So the question is, were these characters here long even before what we would call the normal creation story? So the Nephilim are here. They're on both sides. It was Numbers 13:33, if you're interested in the actual number that we're going to look at. But we're going to look deeper into the story at these iron and feet. Now, if you remember, the two legs are spread. They're not attached to one another. In other words, Rome will eventually split. There will be the Rome of the East and the Rome of the West. Western Rome is Rome. Eastern Rome is Constantinople. That's where Constantine brought his whole armies, and he established an Eastern Roman Empire. He also began to work with the Catholic Church. And so the Catholic Church gained a lot of respect, if you will, a lot of power by attaching itself to Constantine. And Constantine considered himself the Christ. He considered himself to be the Son of God. He saw himself entirely different than a human being. But as we're going through this story, understand that there's this split. Now, we know that eventually the right leg, or Rome, will fall. Eventually, the left leg will disintegrate. In other words, it becomes part of the Byzantine Empire, which is the Roman Empire extended. So that would be what's going on. As you're looking at it, then, we have this new thing happening where the Byzantine Empire begins to move away from Catholicism. As it does, a group of those living there migrated. Migration is one of those ways that the entire world has gotten together. We see migration every day along the border. It's happening in all the countries. Some of those who were in Constantinople moved towards Europe, Northern Europe. And one of those groups was called the Franks. The Franks became a very large group. They actually began to repopulate and began to treat those people that lived under them, understanding themselves to be the Roman Empire. Only they weren't called the Roman Empire then, they were called the Holy Roman Empire. Catholicism had blessed the Franks and had now declared that they were the Holy Roman Empire. So that was happening. Now, the first king in which this occurs is a man called Clovis I, Clovis Merovinum. Clovis was such that he was, well, his kingdom started in Gaul. Gaul is northern France, Belgium, the western side of Germany. That would be the area that he would have occupied at that point in time. And he grew the empire from there. So he was called the first Frankish king. But Clovis was an interesting character. By interesting, besides expanding his empire, he wasn't a Christian. He wasn't a Catholic. He was just in it for himself. But he had a secret that he didn't tell anybody. That secret will come out later as I go through the understanding. Well, Clovis had a father who was really politically savvy. And he created such an alliance with the Catholic Church that whatever he did was acceptable. And because it was acceptable, the Catholic Church prospered and the Franks prospered. They continued to grow and to grow. Now, one thing I found out about Clovis is the fact that he believed he was only half human. He believed that his father wasn't his real father, but his father was Poseidon. Now, if you know your Greek and Roman legends and stories, you'll know that Poseidon was the king of the sea. He was also the king of Atlantis. Now, if you go back into the records, you can read through the records that Poseidon will have 10 sons according to the written record. One of those sons' name was Clovis. Was Clovis a Nephilim? Was he one of those giants? That's the question that I leave with you, because it becomes very significant as time goes on. So Clovis rules and Franks rule for probably 200 years. And as they begin to fade out, another name appears, and his name is Charlemagne. We call him Charlemagne the Great. I guess he's also one of those that calls himself Charlemagne the God. No, that's a different guy. But anyway, Charlemagne the Great basically instilled Europe. He reconquered much of the normal landmass we call Europe, all the way to Austria, all the way north up until Denmark. He goes into Germany, he goes to Poland, goes through France. All of that area now becomes part of his kingdom. And so he creates what's called the Holy Roman Empire. Up and down after he dies, through his sons and through their family, till finally there came another after him, whose name was Kaiser Wilhelm. Kaiser Wilhelm. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm, the word Kaiser was the German word for Caesar. So this man called himself Caesar Wilhelm. That's where he gets his name from. So Kaiser is Caesar. He is involved in World War I. He loses the battle. His kingdom is cut short, so to speak. Depression happens all through Europe because of what's going on. At the same time, 1933, 1932, another king arises. He establishes the Third Reich. The Third Reich. A Reich is the Roman Greek word for the Roman kingdom. So he reestablishes the Third Roman Kingdom. His name was Adolf Hitler. So Hitler reestablishes the Roman Empire. And that's why he continued to conquer all the way through Europe. And he believed that England should have been part of his empire as well as Russia. So he conquers and conquers and conquers until finally he's so extended that he finds himself on the losing end of a war. After this, remember, Germany, where Hitler lived, was now divided. We had the East Germans and we had the West Germans. The West Germans were under the British, the French, the American control, and East Germany was under the control of the Russians. It remained that way until 1900. There's a movie coming out called Reagan. Remember the famous line that Reagan has, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." At that point, Russia was collapsing, and so the wall came down and Germany was reunited. At which time, the Chancellor of Germany, Helmut Kohl, declared the beginning of the Fourth Reich. Now, if you go to the story of the beast, you'll know that the third beast that you're looking at is actually a leopard with 4 heads. Reich 1, Charlemagne. Reich 2, Kaiser Bill. Reich 3 was Adolf Hitler. And Reich 4 was Helmut Kohl. So the German leopard, which was their symbol, had 4 wings, which again was for flight. One of the things that happened was the fact that they became so proficient in aeronautics. That would be one thing. So as we're watching this third empire, or this second, it's be the third empire, mimics Germany. So I give you all of that information to lead you to this point. I want you to go to Daniel, and this time I want you to go to the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel. And we're going to look at 2 portions in Daniel chapter 7, because I think we're going to see that they're not exactly alike. And I think we're going to begin to see a hint of a Nephilim. So if you're in Daniel chapter 7 and you're looking at verse number 7, we're going to do 7 and 8, and then we'll move on from there into a later portion of the book. Okay? 7:7 begins by saying, "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong." Now notice this beast doesn't have a description of a lion, a tiger, a bear, or anything else. It's just simply called terrible. Now he goes on to say it had huge iron teeth, which gave us the idea of the 4th empire, Rome. And it was devouring, breaking into pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it because it had 10 horns. And I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them. And before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that was speaking pompous words. Okay, so we have this 4th beast, terrible, ugly, devouring, punishing. We get the idea it was not a good place. It says that there were 10 horns who came up. Then there was a little horn that came up afterwards. If you read the Jewish commentaries, they will tell you for certain that the 10 that came up are called Caesars, beginning with Julius Caesar, going all the way to Vespasian Caesar. You will find that there were 10 Caesars in a row. Before Julius Caesar, the government was run by what they called the Senate and 2 protocols groups, which would be like our Congress. And they were the heads. But Julius Caesar took over and he became king, Caesar. And so the nation began to move that direction. Now there was a little horn that came up afterwards. Now the little horn doesn't seem to have a crown. It just simply is coming up. Now some people will tell you that it will eventually get a crown, but it doesn't have one now because it's Titus, the son of Vespasian, whose father was now the Caesar on the throne. This character, Titus, was the one who destroyed the temple, went into the Holy of Holies and had intercourse with a prostitute. he looked inside there and he chose to go there because he says there's no God there. Israel doesn't believe in a God because there was nothing in the room. And so he becomes the focus of that whole thing. Now, he has many eyes, and the eyes talk about the idea of brilliance, the idea of knowledge, those kinds of things. And his mouth is speaking pompous words. Well, the pompous words simply could be almost anything, if you would like to say it that way. In other words, he's declaring himself to be God. That's what's going on. And so that's where we're at this particular point in time. So we have 10 Caesars. This is their holy thing. Now, according to the Sadia Gaon, the empire was divided in by 10 different groups. And so instead of 10 Caesars, the Gaudion talks about the idea that this is 10 different nations that are under their control. One was Constantinople in Turkey, Armenia, Germany, Bulgaria, Canaan, the Slavic countries, Bohemia and Moravia, and then there was Hungary, France, Spain, Russia, and then what he called Ishmael, the Arab nations. They were all grouped together as one. Though this was a way that they began to look at it differently. But I want to go down to the bottom portion now. I want to look at chapter 7, verse 19. Okay, chapter 7, verse 19. It begins, well, let's not start there. Start at verse 21. Verse 21. Now, 19 to 22 talk about the beast, but it doesn't get me where I want to go. So start at 21. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth. Do you hear that? Shall be, future, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it into pieces. Same concept that happened with earlier. Their 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom. So these 10 horns come from this kingdom. And another shall rise after them, and he shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 of the other kings. How many kings can a country have at one time? 1. So the 10 kings that we're talking about probably weren't 10 kings, but they were 10 leaders over this particular country. And this later one comes to take its place. Now, as it goes through, it says, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change the times and the laws. Here we're given more information. Now we're looking at what I would call the saints are the Jews. They were referred to in the Old Testament as the saints. We think of the saints as being the ecclesia. We think of it as being the Christian church, but that's not how it is written into the Hebrew Bible. So again, he shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and then he is intending to change the times and the laws. So in other words, he's going to eliminate Jewish tradition. Torah will be out. Now then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, and half a time. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. So we move from what he is to God now judging this nation, and in particular judging this last horn. And he begins to take away his dominion, and he consumes and destroys this nation forever. Now the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people and the saints of the Most High, and his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. So we have slight differences between the early version of our character and this later one. This later one, we can call it Rome if you want. You can call it a deep state. You can call it whatever you want. But it's not the same as the original. There's a differences between it. Now, logically, this fourth beast is the same empire as it was before because they call it a beast, but it was different from all of the others. Consider it different. Now, here in 724, is this little horn different because he's little or because he wasn't king at all? In other words, the eventual leader of this kingdom may never have been the king. He is someone in the background, someone we don't see. That's what I'm looking at. Someone we don't see. Okay? That helps us to understand what's going on in the United States. We think the president's in charge. The president hasn't been in charge for years. Something in the background has been going. Remember Dwight D. Eisenhower? He complained, if we don't watch it, this military state's going to overtake us and we will have no recourse. Congratulations, it already has. We are now under control. If we look at the last elections, if we look at the election of Donald Trump or the election of Joe Biden, we see the fact that there's a whole lot of subterfuge going on. Lots of things are in play, not from the office of the presidency, but from behind the scenes, places where we don't see, the dark corners of what's going on. So here's the U.S., and we might call it a beast, the swamp, the deep state, whatever, but it's the unelected officials. They have the power over various parts of the government. Is our president truly in charge? The answer is probably no. Political insiders are in charge. If that weren't so, would Kamala Harris now be running for president? Legally, could she have been running for president? No. Joe Biden's on the ballot. She couldn't be on the ballot. He was voted in, elected in all the states. She never got a vote. He did. So at this particular point in time, we know that there's something going on in the background. That's what best that I can say. Now, going back into history, I found some other interesting facts that were going on. We know that in the First World War, all of a sudden, Russia deposed their czar. Who deposed it? Well, lo and behold, he happened to be one of the treasurers of the United States government. Now I can't think of his name. I'll think of it pretty quick. Oh, Jacob Schiff. Jacob Schiff. But he was also the chairman of the Bank of the Rothschilds in Germany. Germany is where Karl Marx started. Germany was the seed plot for communism. As we watch what's happening in the United States, we are slowly moving away from democracy, the republic, towards socialism, and I think we're already starting to move through it towards communism. The government's in charge of everything. And if you listen to the platform for our potential Democratic nominee, that's pretty much what's going to happen. I want this number of businesses to get started, but we're going to have taxes and we're going to have to make sure we regulate it correctly. Now, as we move through, then we find that after World War I, Russia becomes a communist nation with the help of Lenin and all of his friends who had been living in the house of Karl Marx. They had been reading his books. They were the educated. He even was sent off to Siberia because of his communist leanings, but he came back. But also what was going on was rather interesting is the fact that we have another character. You see, during the days of Joseph Stalin, he began to help organize another communist state, China. He helped to fund the Chinese. So now what do we have? We have the Bank of Rothschild who financed the Russian Revolution. Now the Russian Revolution has triggered the Chinese Revolution, and we begin to watch across the world what? Countries becoming more communistic each and every day. Now, they're not going to control all the world, but they don't have to, as we're going to find out as we go through the book of Esdras. Look at Daniel chapter 8 for a second. I want you to go to verse 13 and 14. Now, chapter 8 is, I thought I did a good job teaching this, but I really didn't. So we're going back over things that I've already talked about. And so I want to help us understand. Daniel becomes very confused by Jeremiah's 70 weeks of years. And he begins to deal with it in chapter 8, where it begins in 8:13. It says, "Then I heard the Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to him, 'How long will it take for the nation to be fulfilled?'" Or the vision to be fulfilled, thank you. "The vision concerning the daily sacrifices, the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary, the trampling down underfoot of the Lord's people." And he said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, which is 2,300 years. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated." We're going to have to look at this a little bit different because the Hebrew language is not English. And so I need to spend some time talking to you about some of the words that we just read. There are two angels that are talking. Daniel's listening to these two angels. He's been trying to figure out what's going on. The one angel now tells the other angel. So it appears as though Michael has now told Gabriel, and Gabriel is now talking to Daniel. He begins by saying, first off, how long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning daily sacrifices. Daily sacrifices could only be done at the temple. That's what the daily was all about. Well, the temple itself had been destroyed in the 1st century, but there was still the opportunity for sacrifice. But in the year 343 CE, all of a sudden, Jerusalem is not even part of Israel's understanding. It's been taken over by others. And in the place where the temple should have stood goes the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. All of those things are now beginning to clutter the mountain. So the idea of establishing a religion goes away. There's no daily sacrifice. There's a rebellion. Desolation is there. The sanctuary has been surrendered. The temple is underfoot, or the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people. This is going to take 2,300 years when it's all said and done. Lo and behold, on October 6th, 1973, on that year, from 434 or 343 to that year is 2,300 days. In other words, that was a very significant day. Why was it significant? Because on that particular day, the Israeli troops recaptured all the territory that had been taken away, including they now had the Temple Mount, they had Samaria, they had the Golan Heights, they had all of West, the Jordan, East Jordan. All of that now belonged to them. That meant they could now reestablish everything. They haven't, but the potential was now there. So the 2,300 years was now set in stone. But I want you to look at what's going on. It says at the end, then the sanctuary will be reconcentrated or reconsecrated. What does that mean? That takes us to the book of Joshua. So I want you to go to the book of Joshua, and we're going to look at the very first words in Joshua. We're going to start with the very first verse. After the death of Moses, and I'm still reading the King James, by the way. So after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all of this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I will have given you, as I said to Moses. From the wilderness to this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and to the great sea towards the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you, nor will I forsake you. Be strong and be of good courage, for it is the people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give to them. Only be strong and be courageous, that you may observe and do according to all the laws which Moses, my servant, commanded you. Did you hear that? According to all the laws which Moses, my servant, commanded you. Then do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may observe and do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. So from the moment that they crossed the Jordan, they entered into their land that God said he was going to give to them. But he put a caveat on it. You will be successful as long as, do you hear that? As long as they do what? Maintain the book of the law. Now, the book of the law was obviously what we would call the covenant, the Torah. They had prescriptive laws that they were supposed to keep. Two laws were most important. One was, who was God? You shall have no other ones in front of you. The second one is, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Now, if you just took those two laws, know who God is, you don't want to violate anything that would offend God, that took care of most everything. But the second part was the hardest part, because it says to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. You see, one of the things about the Sabbath was it wasn't just every Saturday, Friday night, Saturday, but the Sabbath included the seventh year. The Sabbath included the 50th year. The Sabbath included all of these laws that dealt with how you were to treat the land. Now, once they entered in, they began that first clock. So now the sabbatical years begin. So in 50 years, that would have been identified. They would have gone through 7 Shabbat cycles at that point in time. Continue on. As you begin to look at this, you will find out that they did not honor the Sabbath. Because they did not honor the Sabbath, if you go back to the book of Chronicles, the last Chronicles letter, I think it's chapter 26, you'll find out that they were taken out of the land because they did not allow the land to lie fallow. They lost it because they did not follow the Torah. That's significant. Now, having said that, I want to talk about that 69th week. I want you to understand the week here is actually a sabbatical cycle. It's not just 7 weeks or 7 years. It's actually a 49-year cycle. So all of these 49-year cycles add up. So by the year 434 or 343, the entering into the land, the Temple Mount fell it was no longer theirs. It was gone. And so they had to get it back. Now, this is 349 CE, not 349 BCE. This was in the time when it was after that. So the land now goes through a 23-year period where it's not theirs. They don't have the Temple Mount. It's not until October 6th, 1973, that the Temple Mount is now theirs again. Understand? The Temple Mount becomes theirs again. Again, we now have all the land that belongs to Israel. And at the same point in time, the sabbatical clock kicks in again. They now have to live by the two basic laws, God and the Shabbat. Those are the two main laws that they had to follow. What happened? Well, by the time they ended that 69th year cycle and into the 70th year, and the 70th year came and went, it departed in the year October 7th, 20,023. What happened on 20,023? That was when our friends called Hamas left their compound and attacked Israel and created all the mess that we've been going through for the last 300 plus days. That's all a part of it. So in other words, from owning all the land, they chose not to honor the Sabbath again. Therefore, at the end of the 70th cycle, God again took it all away from them. Now they still are living there, but it's in precarious times. Hamas is now running much of the country. They just had a shootout in the West Bank. All of this territory is really, again, in trouble, I guess. Now, I want you to go and turn in your Bibles to the Daniel. This time, I want you to look at Daniel chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11, verse 40 to 45. And we're going to pick up one of the eagle heads at this point. Now, remember, we said there were 3 heads on the eagle. This is the middle head of the eagle that we're going to be looking at. It's not called the eagle here. It's called the kingdom of the north. It begins by saying, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and oil, by the way, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But the news of the east and the north shall trouble him, and therefore he shall go out in a great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. World War I. Great Britain was caught into a war with the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire owned all of the countries that we see listed here in these last verses. The Ottoman Empire was the king of the south. It controlled a great deal of land. And so in the course of time, he overran all of the country. As he did, all of these countries became part of his. This was the process that was going on. As we go through this, the king of the north eventually reaches his end. He no longer has the ability to control all of the land. And by 1948, he has evacuated everything in the Middle East, leaving it open for the Jews and for the Arabs. And we begin to go from there. With the death of the British head, we now begin to look at the eagle's head, which is the United States. And that's where I'm going to take you next week. Okay. Everything's a history lesson with me, I think, because you have to know history to really understand the Bible. It's so significant. The Bible is written in such a way that you can eventually pull many of the events that happen in world history and plop them right into the Bible under a prophetic concept. But it's important to know that God is in charge of all of this. And so he can write ahead of time what's going to happen. And he does. And that's why Daniel, and that's why Ezra, and that's why many of the prophets. There's only 55 prophets listed in the Talmud, but there were hundreds of thousands of prophets. You see, prophets were people who had studied the scriptures and knew them well enough that they could advise their friends and help their friends through tough times. It would be nice if we all could get to that point where we would be like those other prophets and be able to speak fluently to each other to help each other through our own crisis. Okay, I've now talked for 57 minutes. Is there anything anybody would like to share, say, question, talk at me?